läuft. Hello there and welcome everyone to this next panel called Masters of the Crystal Ball. So my name is Jan Ellermann. I'm a senior specialist in Europol's data protection function. And I'm very happy to be here with Vic Baines, who is a visiting research fellow at Oxford University. She worked with Facebook before. And last but not least, we are ex-colleagues because she also was at Europol for a while. But most importantly, Vic is a distinguished Eden speaker, so it's not the first time we have her as a guest. She's very busy. I understood, Vic, that you also just did a TEDx talk. You have a very cool cybersecurity podcast, which I'm following. You are into folk music as well. And we worked together, in fact, back in the days, years ago, maybe even a decade ago, we worked on Project 2020. And we broke our heads on what the world could look like in 2020. And I don't know if we came up with a virtual conferencing center, which would look like a beach area and all of that. But I think we came pretty close. And jointly, we developed, under your lead at the time, we developed a white paper, and then a gentleman whom I didn't know that well at the time, Rick Ferguson, came into the picture. Rick Ferguson is with us today as well. So he's the vice president of security research at Trend Micro. Rick is a very creative mind, I have to say. Some refer to him as the rockstar in information security, and I think that's a very nice description. I would go for that. Also, Rick is an Eden member and a good friend meanwhile. And what happened with this white paper, which we created at Europol, is Rick Ferguson was also involved into the project, and he turned all of that into an amazing YouTube series, science fiction, which I recommend that you check it out on YouTube. I'm sure it's still somewhere there. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the panelists. Vic, Rick, the show is all yours.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Vic.
And I am Rick. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We have a cool video to show you. In 2012, Europol's European Cybercrime Centre, EC3, and Trend Micro completed an exercise to anticipate the state of technology and cybercrime in 2020. We imagined a future society with both the possibilities and the consequences of technological advancement. Now that 2020 is here, let's take a moment to see which of our predictions came to life and which did not. We accurately predicted new employment patterns, known as the gig economy. Etsy maker, Uber driver, portfolio career, I'm talking about you. Open sourcing intellectual property is becoming the norm. Many mobile device makers, for example, share patents, and GitHub is full of open source projects included within apps of all kinds. Today, consumers accept a lower level of privacy and security by offering their personal data as payment, whether they realize it or not. Fortunately, global regulations continue to be adopted, helping individuals regain control of their personal data. People today use numerous online persona already, a concept that we developed in a much broader capacity for banking or voting, for example. As remote working becomes the norm, expect this to increase. The lines between cybersecurity and national security have blurred. This trend will only increase as 5G and other infrastructure advancements become more widespread. The web has given power to the people as individuals have created global communities and movements that have influenced local, regional, and global policy, all through social media. Cybersecurity has become an important industry as individuals, businesses, and governments produce increasing amounts of data. We posited a blend of risk-based and control-based cybersecurity that is roughly reflected today. Threat actors have moved a significant proportion of their focus towards connected and mobile devices, cryptocurrencies, crowdsourced information, and social media. AR developments are ongoing, but it's not a mainstream technology with everyday use, as we envisioned it would be. We didn't call out artificial intelligence explicitly, While machine learning and AI as a back-end technology was present in the scenarios, it's not something we expected to become a key buzzword. We've learned a lot from analysing our predictions. However, 2020 has also shown us that unforeseen world events can totally derail annual predictions. We look forward to putting what we've learned into practice for our next project, Predicting 2030.
Okay, so I feel like, Jan, you've given such a good introduction to the project that we can save ourselves some time on this piece, but just very briefly to talk about what we did at Europol that was turned into the videos that you can find at 2020.trendmicro.com. Really, we wanted to look beyond the immediate threat predictions that are made every year. And it was my responsibility when I worked at Europol to bring together the IOCTA, the Internet Organized Crime Threat Assessment. And as we saw, what we really needed to do was to anticipate those changes in the operating environment, the emerging technologies that were coming down the line that would then be liable to misuse by criminals. And we came up with 3 different scenarios, one for 2 different types of business, one for the ordinary citizen and one for governments, and they were all interconnected. You can find that white paper on the same website, 2020.trendmicro.com. We conducted this review this year, and Rick now is going to take over and tell you a little bit about some of the thematic considerations that we were able to highlight.
Great. Thank you, Vic. So if you go and take some time to read the white paper as was published, hopefully as you read through it, and it does read, certainly the scenario part of the document anyway, does read almost like a very short science fiction novel back when it was written, maybe less science fiction-y now. Hopefully as you browse through those scenarios, you will see things and think, oh my word, I actually saw this happen, or I remember a headline that related to that, because it's actually been a significant pleasure in the intervening years to see stories pop up in the news. And Vic and I would very often DM each other on Twitter or something and say, hey, have you seen this headline? This was 2020, or we predicted that. Or so we've really seen a few things come to pass. I wanted to surface just a few of them to give you an idea of some of the significant hits in the document. The first was a prediction around intellectual property. So in the intervening years, and let's say it was probably the last 7 years of the decade, really, we published it in 2013, if memory serves correctly. So research was ongoing from 2012. What we predicted was a move from the absolute application of intellectual property rights to a commons-based approach, which in a commercial business scenario maybe seems counterintuitive, but we have certainly seen in limited use cases, but becoming more and more common, we've seen that prediction coming true. So back in 2014, Tesla announced that it would make some of its patents on electric vehicle technology freely available, dropping the threat of lawsuits over intellectual property, because Elon Musk himself, as you know, he's quite a vocal chap, argued that the removal of pesky legal barriers would help to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport. So he saw a societal bonus from by removing these legal barriers to sharing technology. Toyota followed Tesla, shared more than 5,500 patents related to hydrogen fuel cell cars, making them available royalty-free. And Ford has also decided to allow their competitors to use its own EV, electric vehicle-related patents. So certainly we've seen it in auto manufacturing, but also, as you can tell by the logos on the slide there are other applications as well. In 2017, there was another sort of groundbreaking or earth-shaking one where a consortium of 9 companies, including Google, Samsung, LG, HTC, and others, all agreed to share their patents covering the Android operating system and a bunch of apps for that operating system. It's altruistic, of course, waiving your legal rights, but it also makes good business sense, particularly if, in the case of, for example, the Android operating system and app marketplace, you were coming from let's say, second place at that point in time. You needed to build up an audience. So, there are strong altruistic and strong commercial reasons for doing things like that. Another area where we made a whole bunch of predictions was around, obviously, data protection and privacy. We predicted the rise of the industry of data brokers. And that was a prediction that has come true, as I'm sure you're all aware. There's a whole industry of data brokers out there. But the part of the prediction that was about who was going to control the data that was being sold by these data brokers, we kind of got wrong. Hopefully, it remains to come true, because I think there is a groundswell of opinion and emotion that people do want to reclaim ownership over their own data, which is what we predicted, and that the monetization of that data would reward the subject of that data. I still think that there's something terribly wrong with legislation when you are the subject of your own data and someone else is the owner. I think we have to do a lot of clearing up around those terms. I'm the owner of my data, and I should be the one who has the legal right to decide what happens to it and how it's monetized. Obviously, the EU is making great strides out there. Some of you based in the EU, as I am, although my accent would tell you another story, that I'm outside the EU. I'm not. I moved back into it deliberately. You may have noticed, for example, in things like Facebook Messenger and Instagram, a little message along the top of the screen that says some of the features have been disabled in this app. The reason for that, you may not know because they don't explain it very clearly, is the e-privacy directive from the EU. So Facebook have had to turn off, and they don't really explain why they've had to turn it off, which raises suspicions quite significantly. Things like polls, selfie stickers, a bunch of interactive options, setting nicknames for people in chat, using fun facial filters in chat. All of that stuff has been switched off. So there's obviously something in the back end about what they're doing with that data that breaches the e-privacy directive. But there are now hundreds of data brokers out there monetizing other people's data. One example, Axiom, boasts that they offer 11,000 different data attributes in over 62 countries, I think, that relate to more than 2.5 billion people. So the amount of data that's being out there and being monetized is staggering. And if you've been following the news about the recent breaches at FireEye and a bunch of US government agencies, Sunburst is the name that's been given to the malware and the campaign. Axiom, unfortunately, is very high in the alphabetical list of customers using the SolarWinds platform, which is what was breached. So all of that data maybe was accessible to attackers as well. So we have a long way to go on data protection and data privacy. The next area, the definition of crime. The distinction between legitimate activity and illegal activity has become increasingly blurred, particularly with regard to data harvesting and interception and reputation manipulation, and the ability to define what is or isn't a crime obviously changes across jurisdictions as well. That's becoming increasingly challenging. Legislators are increasingly challenged to define the circumstances and purposes under which such activity is okay, and that's obviously where GDPR and the e-privacy directive have come from. But there's no global agreement on those standards. Identity and reputation, I mentioned them just now. Certainly we have seen in recent years, the reason Taylor Swift is on that slide, by the way, is because she's great. And I had to have somebody great on the slide. She also had an album called Reputation, so that's the real reason. Government reputation, as we've seen over recent years, but particularly over recent elections, has become highly vulnerable to criticism, however unfounded, and highly vulnerable to attacks, socially amplified, undermining reputation and undermining confidence. We did predict those, but I would say that we could have been a lot stronger in that prediction, but they were contained within those 2020 scenarios. The government is coming under increasing pressure to restrict and regulate data hosting and data retention. That's GDPR. So that's another prediction that came true. And we also predicted widespread use of varying identifications, varying levels of pseudonymity, anonymity, verification. And that comes true in various jurisdictions. I know there was the recent UK propositions that ended up falling at the final post about a UK verification ID for access to gambling and pornography online. UK Porn laws, they called them. I suppose that was a reference to the Corn laws. So definitely the predictions in the document around identity and reputation, there is a lot of stuff there that came true. Another area that I was particularly interested in, because I think there's a lot of benefit to be had from it, was in a universal security score. We predicted it in the document initially as security ratings for businesses, probably issued by insurers, which would allow an organization to choose better business partners who better secure their data. And now by 2020, this is beginning to be applied on a nation state level. The ITU, for example, releases its global cybersecurity index, which does exactly this, gives a security score to nations and nation states. We spoke also about the splinternet, the breaking up of the internet. And I think this has come true in varying forms. Again, back to GDPR and things like the policing of hate speech within the EU, that creates a level playing field within the EU, but it's not level with the rest of the world. The rolling back of net neutrality in the United States, same thing. Great Firewall of China, obvious example, and Russia's recent ability, tested ability to run their own domestic internet, to be able to operate in isolation from the rest of the wider world. So we've definitely seen both legislatory and regulatory and technological moves towards this phenomenon of the splinternet. And then I think the last one that I'm going to reference is actually one that I had great fun bringing up. I was at a meeting at the United Nations in December last year, just before we all got locked into our houses. We spoke in the document about a proposition. We said that by 2020, there was this international cybercriminal court because the law enforcement agencies and national legal organizations and national courts were having trouble finding expertise, keeping up to date, being able to prosecute, and certainly for the state-on-state activity or state-sponsored or state-aligned activity, that there was a great deal of difficulty in actually bringing people to book for that. We have seen this, obviously we don't have an international cybercriminal court, but we have seen this Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace. The prediction isn't there yet, that there is no court. But in the real world, we have this Paris call. More than 74 nations have now signed. But when you consider that the US, Russia, China, Iran, and both the Koreas have not, you've got to wonder if an agreement like this makes any sense without those countries showing a real intent to maintain peace. Victor Bravo, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Rick. So what's next? Well, one of the things we were able to do in the 2020 review is also review the methodology and to say, well, how well did we do with the structure of building the scenarios, identifying the threats that could be possible in that particular world of 2020, as is now, and then working out some of those implications for cybersecurity stakeholders. And really, you can only test how good a particular methodology is for a futures exercise if you run it again. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're running it again for 2030. Now, as Jan and other members of the project team back in 2012 will remember, it was actually fairly easy, I would say, for us as a project team to systematically review most of the information out there at the time about emerging technologies. We were able to review scientific abstracts. We were able to review media reporting, which on cybersecurity at the time was actually much, much smaller than it is now. The challenge we face now is that there is far too much information out there about emerging technology. You only have to look at the World Intellectual Property Organization's database to see how many thousands and, dare I say, millions of patents have been filed relating to artificial intelligence. So it's just not humanly possible for the project team now to review all of that information. So we thought we would use you, We're crowdsourcing the hive mind, particularly of information security, criminal justice, and data protection experts. So we would love for you to get involved, firstly via our SurveyMonkey link, which you can see here, but I will also put in the main chat in the auditorium when we finish this session, so that you have a clickable link to it. But please get involved. What we have is a number of really, really fun statements about the technology that we think could be online by 2030. And we'd like you to consider whether we've got those timelines right, and also what you think the implications of those might be, because we want to try and make sure that we've done as comprehensive horizon scanning as possible to catch as much as we can about the likely technological developments and their misuse by 2030. So how are we getting on? Well, I think what we see is that there is much greater uncertainty actually in the world. We've gone from the fear, uncertainty and doubt model of cybersecurity, FUD, to the VUCA model, in which there is considerable uncertainty, but also accelerated technological development that I think we have all experienced during lockdown. We also want to consider those barriers to adoption. So what could actually stop us going down a particular route, and some of those contingencies and convergences. Because, of course, what we know is that the future isn't just about 5G developing in isolation, or blockchain being adopted in isolation, or quantum being approached in isolation. These technologies converge in a single world, and there will be interdependencies between all of those. So yeah, 5G we have robotics, we have AI, we have additive manufacturing. So, there's been a lot of hype about 3D printing over the years. And when I was still at Europol, I was interviewed about the chap in Texas that had claimed to have produced the world's first fully functioning 3D printed weapon. So this is going back some while to 2012. But we're also looking at immersive technologies, which are finally, in the form of VR and AR, they're finally becoming of a price point and of a bandwidth to be able to be used, and to be able to be used effectively in a number of different settings, be they recreational or commercial. If you've ever wondered what the contents of a strategic analyst's head look like, they look a little bit like this, but a lot messier, I think it would be fair to say. I hope you can all see that. But essentially, what we're looking at as part of this futures exercise is not just the technology that will come down the line and how that will converge, but how that will have an impact on lots of different aspects of society. So it's about population and demographics. It's about education. It's about retail. It's about climate and the environment. It's about outer space more than it ever was. It's about the deep sea. And you can see there that all of those different aspects and more we have to be thinking about, and those interconnections between all of them. So I'm going to finish up with a plea. As I say, I will put this link into the main conference chat, but please do get involved. We really, really need you to sense and health check our efforts, because we can be pie in the sky about this, but it's only really representative of a wide section of experts on this if we can get you directly involved. And the great thing is that I and the team, we review every single one of the questionnaires that you fill in. I've reviewed 100 of them in detail so far, and there have been some really, really great contributions, many of which have directly influenced the world that we're building in the scenarios. So you do have a direct impact on what we build, the threats that we identify as potentially manifesting by 2030, and the implications for cybersecurity and data protection stakeholders going forward, the things we need to think about right now to anticipate some of these threats and risks. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed. Look forward to your questions, and also look forward to continuing the chat in the main chat function as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you as well. I've already put the URL in the chat while you were talking there, Vic, so saved you a job.
Thank you very much, mate. Much appreciated. Teamwork. There we go.
And so thanks to both of you for this super nice presentation. So I'm going to join the SurveyMonkey, but only subject to one condition. So if I join, I also want such an excellent sci-fi series on YouTube, ideally featuring both of you again. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, probably because everybody is daring for a coffee. But before we go there, maybe just one thing, because you said on data protection privacy, you we all saw the rise of data brokers, but we projected that people would reclaim ownership of their data. So these comments I also hear from people like Jaron Lania, or that's a big topic in Social Dilemma. But I ask myself, like, how can we realistically get there? If you could answer that question briefly, I would be very grateful. Thanks.
There are already some projects out there, private enterprise projects, which allow you to stake ownership over your data, and then those data brokers will license out on your behalf that data to interested parties. Obviously, the selling point for commercial organizations to source their data in that way is that nominally they'll be getting more accurate data because the people giving that data are surrendering it for and licensing it for that kind of use. It means that they will always be able to maintain, for example, compliance with things like GDPR, because there will be the explicit consent of every data owner for every data item for the exact way that that item of data is being used. Tim Berners-Lee, I think, was one of the people that came up with one of the propositions. I think he called them data pods, and that's only one of the projects. One of the hackers that was involved in the original Cult of the Dead Cow, I know is now involved in a project of this nature as well, because we were talking on Twitter about it recently. So instead of data brokers being able to harvest data like observed data and to create their inferred data from that observed data, it's and allowing them then to monetize that, what we need to do is to restrict the availability of that data legally, so that if they are doing that, it's not legal, and then maximize the availability of data in such a way that allows the data owner, me, to benefit financially from the use of my data. And that's kind of the prediction that was made in the document. And I think we'll get there, but I think probably that's something that should be, more in the 2030 predictions, because I think it will take that long for such a change when so much data is already out there and available now, and everyone's in the habit of surrendering it for peanuts anyway.
So very briefly, Jan, because I know we're short on time. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee's Solid is something that I have signed up to, and I'm sure many people in the audience as data protection specialists will have already signed up to. Differential privacy is something that is very much in our focus to see how adoption could be rolled out in the run up to 2030. But also, look, I mean, I know we all talk about Schrems a bit too much, perhaps sometimes in these conferences, but Schrems really was a landmark for me, that there was an alertness, a consciousness of privacy, and the publicity that was accorded to that suggests to me that, people are a little bit more bothered by this. Cambridge Analytica, the pickup of that and that particular coverage is something that, we haven't seen previously. So I think we're getting there.
Excellent. Thanks again, you two, so much. Everybody check out that SurveyMonkey. With these words, I'm going to close that panel, and I understand we're going to switch to the next one immediately. So what you need to do is you carry your laptop to your coffee machine, you keep it running, and you make your coffee while you continue watching. That's all the beauty of these kind of conferences. So enjoy, guys. Thank you very much.